Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Bilal Kurd, and in today's lesson, I'm going to explain March 2023 paper 32, and the question number 2 that is relevant for paper 4. Sorry, this is 42 because this is paper 4. Alright, so we have this paper in front of us, and first let me take you to the question that we have in context, and that is question number 2. Advise Ruhi on whether Porter's 5 forces analysis is the most useful approach when developing S2U's new business strategy, and the marks are 20. But before we dive down into the discussion, I would want to bring your attention to the assessment skills division. You can clearly see that the knowledge is for 3 marks, which means that any 2 content points may be enough. Application is for 2 marks, which means that whatever you're writing needs to be mentioned in context of the case and links need to be made appropriately. Analysis is of 8 marks. Now what does this mean? This means that if you do not evaluate the entire strategy as a whole, then the examiner says that the maximum marks that you're going to get are going to be 6 out of 8. And in order to get 8, you need to evaluate the entire approaches as a whole as well. I will be talking on that part in the later part of the video, inshallah. And evaluation is for 7 marks as well, which means that there needs to be evaluative comments, more or less 7 in number. Alright, so we have this question that focuses on Porter's 5 forces. So this is going to form a major chunk of our answer. But then the question says that is it the most useful approach? So first of all, we need to make sure that we know when it comes to approaches for strategy, what approaches do we have? So you have different approaches like these. And you can clearly see that these are majorly the topics that you study in strategic analysis and strategic choice. So coming back to the context, let's affiliate ourselves a little more with what the business is about so that we can dive down and help ourselves gain a better understanding as to how we are going to answer this particular question. I would still suggest that if you have not watched my video on question number 1 with respect to paper 4, the specimen paper analysis, Ryan's form, it is advised that you watch it first so that you pretty much know how to answer question number 1, and then you can eventually watch this video as well. Alright, so STU provides information technology support to small businesses based in country C. So you can clearly see that this is basically a B2B business which operates in the industrial market. So your consumers are not the final end consumers. Your customers are different businesses. That significantly changes your marketing mix, all right? Because when you provide information technology services to such businesses, it's going to be a cost for them, and businesses may be very price conscious because they would want to minimize their overall cost in order to preserve their profitability. All right, so let's move on. Its customers use IT, but they are not big enough to be able to afford their own IT support. Fine, so far so good. STU was set up by Kareem, who is an IT engineer. When Kareem started the business, he employed 3 engineers. Now, STU employs over 50 engineers and has customers throughout country Z. Alright, so you can clearly see that there is a breakup of the services, that it involves creation and maintenance of business websites, the 24 telephone access, and the installation of software as well. So the services include a combination of both software and hardware, obviously. Okay, so this means that STU would be having suppliers of software and hardware, and then would be offering its services to different small businesses. So this is pretty much the supply chain that you can clearly see. And as we move on, you can see that there's a timeline given to you. Now this timeline is relevant for question number 1. But I would still suggest that you pause this video and read this timeline so that you have a better understanding of what the business has went through and where is it now. The year that is of the greater focus for question number 2, it's going to be 2022 and way forward. Alright. So the events that take place in 2022 may be very relevant to our question number 2 as well. And you can clearly see that Kareem, who can primarily be known to be the backbone of the business, has left the business to pursue a career in television. And Ruhi, who had been working under Kareem, is now promoted to the chief executive officer. Though it's not clearly mentioned, explicitly mentioned, but you can clearly see that as Kareem left, sales growth have started to slow down. By no means it says that sales have started to fall. No, sales growth have started to slow down. So for example, if you had a 10% increase in sales, now the increase in sales is like 7%. So your sales aren't growing as they were growing before. And a possible reason can be that Kareem, the major backbone of the business, has left to pursue a career in media agencies. Alright, so the passage that is relevant to us, though it is very little, but still we are going to go through it. Ruhi was concerned about STU's recent sales performance. She asked an external management consultancy to analyze the market. The consultancy produced a Porter's 5 forces analysis. Ruhi is now developing a new business strategy to enable STU to grow in the future. Even though we have not reached the answer breakup as of yet, there is still something that I would want to advise you people on. Whenever you find questions, whether it's paper 3, paper 2 or paper 4, always, if you're, let's say for example, using an appendix, always try to first determine the source. Where did you get the information in the appendix? And once you've gotten the source, try to evaluate the reliability of information and also as to when this analysis was conducted. Now, if you focus, the consultancy was external with no investment or no stake involved in STU. That brings us to the question, to what extent can this analysis be relied upon? And not just that, but you're not given the sources through which this external management consultancy had produced this analysis. Did it use market research? If it used market research, was it primary? Was it secondary research? And what was the reputation of this external management consultancy? Is it a new business? Is it an established business? Has it been providing such services to businesses from the past few years? Or does it have a lot of experience in its cap? So these things are unknown, which obviously brings us to the ambiguity and to the conclusion that the information given by this external management company may not be completely reliable or may not be completely relied upon. Also, this particular agency had conducted the 5 forces analysis in 2022. But Ruhi is asking you to evaluate a new business strategy or evaluate the approaches that would be used to evaluate a new business strategy from this year forward. So much of the question arises that the analysis that was conducted in 2022 would obviously be based on past performance. How businesses performed from January 2022 till December 2022, you will be given a 5 forces analysis. But it is not guaranteed, it is not certain that businesses are likely to perform the same way they performed in 2022 from this point beyond or from this point forward. So performance of businesses may be different in 2023. So your analysis your 5 forces analysis in some way might actually become outdated or less relevant concerning the future of the business. So even though we have not reached the answer or the bulk of the analysis, we can still come out with a lot of evaluative comments that we can use either throughout the answer or in the conclusion as per your wishes. Alright, so let's move on. Then again, you are given in Appendix 1, which is of complete relevance or major relevance to question number 1. But I'm just going to cherry pick some of the things so that you know how to relate them with question number 2 as well. The objective is very important and you can clearly see the objective is to increase sales. and the business uses a dynamic pricing method, which means that the business will frequently be changing its prices owing to a change in consumer demand, customer demand, alright? Okay, so Appendix 2 states that Kareem is basically gaining popularity and becomes the new face of daytime television and XYZ, which is then again of relevance to question number 1. But you can use this in question number 2 as well, which I'll be telling you how in a later while. So Appendix 3 gives us some financial information, and you can clearly see that the profit margin is falling. Even though profits on an absolute basis would have increased. What do I mean by that? You can calculate the profits by multiplying this together. So you'll know that the actual profits have risen, but profits as a percentage of sales have been falling. So falling profitability may be a major concern. Why? Because you can clearly see that in 2021, the business had decided to convert into a public limited company. And since you have decided to convert into a public limited company, you will be answerable to one of the stakeholders who can be known as shareholders. And since you have now falling profitability percentages, this might mean that there would be compromised returns in terms of dividends for your shareholders as well. Also, you can clearly see that the market share has risen from 5% to 28%, which can be a good thing for STU. The IT engineers employees have significantly increased, but the customer satisfaction levels have reduced to 72%, which might indicate that since the business has grown to be a public limited company, there would have been possibilities of economies of scale, but this would mean that there would be equal chances of diseconomies of scale to arise as well. So this appendix may be of greater relevance for question number 1, but we have discussed as much as we could for question number 2 as well. Now let's move to the last segment of this particular insert, and that is the Appendix 4. And you can clearly see that the Appendix 4 contains of the Porter's 5 forces analysis for the IT support industry produced by the management consultancy for S2U. I would advise you to solve strategic analysis questions of the previous paper 3 to get yourself more affiliated as to how do you analyze such information. So you can clearly see that you have been given the complete 5 forces analysis with bargaining power of suppliers, which I am going to call as BPOS, with bargaining power of buyers, that can also be called bargaining power of customers. You are given threat of substitutes, and you are given threat of new entrants. Now, mind you that there is an abundance of information. There is a wealth of information that you can use. And what I've seen is that most students would claim it as a responsibility to discuss every single thing in their answers. Now that is something that I would not advise, because even in the previous paper 3 questions, there are questions in which you were given a SWOT analysis like this, with the examiner telling you the various strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. But if you were to discuss each and every single point, you will not leave yourself with enough time to talk about other issues or to evaluate these approaches overall. So my advice would be to pick any two elements that you find necessary or you find yourself to be the most comfortable with. For this particular video, I am going to pick bargaining power of suppliers, and I am going to pick threat of new entrants. And if you focus, bargaining power of suppliers tells you something that we have already discussed before, tells you that software suppliers have monopoly power, whereas on the other hand, hardware is a competitive market, and these both businesses are basically our suppliers as well. So when it comes to software, the bargaining power of suppliers are high, which means that the price of raw materials, or in this case the price of softwares, will be high as well. So indicating that cost would be high and STU might have little profits. Now, most of the students write an obvious chain of analysis that STU can transfer the burden of increased cost onto customers. But that may not be possible, because if you focus your attention to another particular piece of information that states that price is far more important than brand loyalty. And this is the same thing that we discussed in the start of the video. So it may not be possible for you to just transfer the burden of your increased cost onto consumers in the form of higher selling prices, because the market is very competitive and your consumers are well informed and highly price sensitive as well, indicated by the bargaining power of buyers as well. But on the other hand, there is a good news for you. If you talk about the hardware competitive market, there, since the market is very competitive, you are going to have a lot of suppliers. And in case of hardware, you can see that the bargaining power of suppliers may not be that strong, which means that your cost of hardware equipment that you may need to install for different small businesses that you offer your services to might be low. So much depends on the extent to which what's the distribution in the hardware and the software costs. If let's say your total cost of raw materials comprise of 70% software and 30% hardware, then the business might be in a problem and might have to face lower profitability. And why would lower profitability be that much important to this business? Because sir, this business is a public limited company and you have to be answerable to your shareholders. So falling profits would mean compromised dividends for your shareholders as well. Alright? And if you focus on threat of new entrants, I'm going to pick this point as a major point of our discussion. So let's quickly talk about the answer structure. You can pause this video and make yourself more comfortable with other pieces of information. The answer structure is going to be like this. This is my advice. You can choose an answer structure if you want, but this is my advice. In Ryan's form, the specimen paper of 2023, if you look at the question asks you in general as to which approaches do you think will be suitable in order to develop a business strategy. The question does not state a specific approach in the words. It leaves it on to the students to come up with their own approaches. But if you look at the wordings of this question, you have been specifically given an analysis along with a wealth of information. So in this particular question, I would suggest that you first discuss 5 forces in great detail. And how are you going to go on about that? You will first be discussing some individual elements about 5 forces, and then you will be discussing 5 forces overall as well, so that you can gain the higher mark for analysis. And once you are done with the discussion of 5 forces, you can perhaps make a small paragraph on other approaches as well. I would use pest and sword, but you can use blue ocean, scenario planning, Ansov matrix, force field, whatever you want, and then a conclusion in the end. Alright, so let's first, without further ado, jump towards how we are going to do our analysis when it comes to 5 forces. So when you talk about 5 forces, I have first broken down the individual elements and given my 2 cents as to how analysis could be made. So first, for example, if we pick the force threat of new entrants, we can clearly see that it is written in the case that price is more important than brand loyalty since it is an industrial market. Now, how do you write this in your answers? Just do not repeat information from the case. What I would want you to think over is, how can STU make use of this information? So if you were a business and you were in an industry where you feel that your consumers are more price sensitive than any other possible concern, what would you do as a business? What actions would you take? And what results would you expect from those actions? So likewise, how can STU make use of this information? Now you're using a particular information from the case and then advising as to how STU can manage this. So perhaps STU can reduce potential threat of new entrants by keeping prices low. And why would you say that STU will have the ability to keep prices low? Because of these 2 reasons. That STU possibly benefits from economies of scale since it is a large business. and it is also the market leader. If you were to read the case, you'll get to know of this as well, and has the highest market share, which means that it would be having relatively higher consumers than other businesses, and can continue the use of dynamic pricing to drive out competition, perhaps even bear some loss in the short term as well. But then again, once you've mentioned this piece of information, this is you analyzing the information, right? Now you would have to evaluate whatever you've said. And if you have lesser idea, if you do not have a clear understanding of how evaluation is done, I would then again suggest that you watch one of my video lessons on how to improve evaluation, because I'm going to continue with the same understanding that I had used in the prior video. The extent to which this will be successful will depend upon. The extent to which you can drive out competition by lower prices will depend upon. So think of, why do you think that lowering prices may not be able to drive out the threat of new competitors entering in the IT support industry? And the reasons that I've mentioned is that it much depends upon the size of competing businesses. If your competitors are large scale businesses, because the case does mention the emergence of international competitors, and they may be large scale, so they can actually have the ability to fight on low prices with you and fight on price wars. And likewise, if you are lowering your prices to drive out competition, what would your shareholders think? Because you are a public limited company and your profitability has also fallen to 2%. Your profit margins have been compromised. So how do you plan to convince them on the annual general meeting that this is going to land in the long-term benefit of your shareholders? Because you are obviously dependent on them for additional investment as well. So this will be like a major chunk of your answers, and you've used a particular information from the case, then mentioned as to how it would be useful for S2U, and then evaluated the same point as well. So you did it with one particular piece of information from the 5 forces. Then you move on to another piece of information, that is bargaining power of suppliers. And this basically contains the same kind of understanding and analysis that I was just talking when we were dissecting the case information, that software suppliers have a high bargaining power, whereas hardware suppliers have a low bargaining power. What can S2U do in this particular situation? So since you have high cost of software suppliers, this means that you would need to make sure that you maintain good relations with your suppliers of software, because you're dependent on them and they have a high bargaining power, and you cannot risk losing your relations. So perhaps paying them on time and paying fair prices would be a good way to go. So how can S2U use this information? S2U would need to minimize cost in other areas, because you're incurring higher cost with respect to software. So what are the other costs that you have? Can you minimize them? Can you perhaps minimize on labor? Can you perhaps minimize on infrastructure? What can you do to minimize your cost in other areas, because you still need to protect your profits, all right? And likewise, this also suggests the high importance of keeping suppliers happy, especially the ones which are providing you software services. But then again, you need to evaluate this piece of information as well. And how can you evaluate it? I would suggest that you are now faced with a situation where the cost of software supplies is relatively very high, and the cost of hardware supplies are not that high because they have a lower bargaining power. So if you were in this situation and you could see that software suppliers are charging too much, which is making you uncompetitive, what would you do? Is there any way that you can minimize the impact of this particular drawback, of this particular problem? Perhaps you can consider merging or taking over one of your software suppliers. So chances of vertical integration with your software suppliers can actually minimize the intensity that this drawback carries. And also, in the first point A, we mentioned that S2U would need to minimize cost in other areas. But then again, in order for us to suggest it better, it would be important for us to have information regarding the cost in other areas. So there is particular absence of data, as you can see in point number 2, that you need data on the management of expenses or the possible sources, so that you can determine the possibility of minimizing your expenses and then preserving your profitability, not just for your shareholders but for the future survival of the business as well. So there you go. You have successfully identified, talked in context, analyzed, and even evaluated 2 pieces of information. And if you, let's say for example, have less time, even 1 piece of information may be enough, because then you are going to go for the overall analysis of 5 forces. So now this overall analysis is going to talk about the overall usefulness the overall usefulness of 5 forces, but make sure that you talk in context of the business. So you can pause this video and go through these points because they're pretty much self-explanatory. And in the same manner, you are going to talk about the limitations as well. Now, limitations are pretty much the things that we discussed in the starting part of the video, that it was conducted by an external company. You're not known the sources behind this analysis. Was it primary research? Was it secondary research? There is valid absence of data. Likewise, this analysis was conducted in 2022, and it's not certain that the businesses will be performing in the same manner in the future years as well. So it may be of limited usefulness. Then again, much depends on the expertise of Ruhi to critically evaluate options, because Kareem has now left and she has recently taken charge and made herself the CEO. So the prior experience of Ruhi managing such a business is not known from the case. And then again, even if the analysis was true, much depends on how you use it. If the management is inexperienced, then no matter how good the analysis is, it would still be of limited benefit. And then again, the analysis seems to be purely qualitative and does not indicate the financial information. You need decision tree analysis, you need investment appraisal, so that you can take more informed choices. And this analysis also does not differentiate between which forces are the most strongest and which forces are the least strongest, because you will have limited resources. STU is likely to have limited resources, so it cannot at one time focus on dealing with every particular force. Perhaps dealing with suppliers and dealing with the threat of new entrants may be most important in this case, or perhaps something else. But you have limited resources and you need this information, and this information seems to be absent, and 5 forces does not tell you which of these sources are the most important, which is a very crucial piece of information that STU needs in order to evaluate and in order to consider the way forward. So once you have done the overall analysis of 5 forces, I would then suggest to make a small paragraph on PEST and SWOT combined. If you're running out of time, then you can choose any one particular approach, just to show the examiner that yes, there are other approaches and you have an understanding of how these approaches are used to form strategies. So I would suggest that you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and political, economical, social and technological factors. Pick any one from this and pick any one from this. So let's say you pick technological from here, and let's say you pick a weakness from here. A weakness can be that Kareem has now left, and you can use this point as to how this may restrict the ability of STU to make or develop a proper strategy, because Kareem has now left. So how would you go on and about this particular aspect of information? First, identify one element from either SWOT or PEST, then tell as to how this information will be useful, and then the challenges faced by STU when doing SWOT or PEST, or as to how this information may not be useful when coming up or developing a new business strategy. And I have, for the sake of an example, just so that you have a better understanding, I have attached a sample analysis of PEST. So you can pause this video and read this particular analysis. So you'll get pretty much of an idea as to how pest and sort can be used when making particular paragraphs and discussing the viability and the feasibility of these two pieces of analysis when developing new business strategies. So we have technological factors such as remote working as identified in the particular passage that you're looking, or you can come up with any other, for example, developments in technology such as 5G. So businesses are going to ask for 5G sources as well. And how can you use this? Perhaps you can, coordinate with your software suppliers to introduce 5G, to be the first one to introduce 5G technology, and provide the businesses with that technology that can actually reduce the threat of new entrants as well, because there would be a high amount of product differentiation, service differentiation, and you can make use of your core competencies. Perhaps your skilled engineers can be a core competence that can help you obtain a better edge over your rivals in this particular case and maintain your market share and maintain your position as a market leader. So once you are done talking about 5 forces and sort and pest in detail, then comes the conclusion part. And once you're concluding, these can be your conclusive comments. Now remember that you do have to come with an overall judgment. Do you agree that 5 forces is the most important, or do you think no, any other approach may be the most important? And whatever you think, does your judgment depend on anything? Because if, let's say for example, your judgment says that STU might plan to diversify in the future, and if you plan to diversify in the future, then this analysis may be of limited importance because this analysis is a specific industry analysis. But if you diversify, you would need a new analysis. And before actually going for a strategy of diversification, you'd need sort and pest. You'd need core competency analysis to see if you have any existing strengths or core competencies that can help you prepare better for this particular move of diversification that involves you moving from your area of expertise. So much would depend upon your future plans, much would depend upon the availability of finance that would be needed for market research. And then you can also mention, why would market research be so important and so crucial in this particular case study, in this particular context. Also, you can also mention the sequence in which these approaches will be used, along with the reason as to why do you suggest the sequence. Perhaps students might suggest that it would be good to start off with its existing SWOT analysis, so that internal analysis will be good, so that how can you prepare better. Because self-awareness might be the first step to go for effective self-management and, in short, social management as well, if you talk about emotional intelligence. So first step is to make yourself more aware with your information, with your capabilities, with your strengths, with your competencies, with your weaknesses, with your errors, with your problems, with your shortcomings, with the obstacles, and then perhaps come up with a external industry analysis. And then you can also mention as to how these approaches, or the use of these approaches, or the decisions you take based on these approaches are likely to affect your key stakeholders. So this will be your conclusion. You can vary based on the time that is given to you, that is available for you, because remember that if you were to go for paper 4 in a sequence, you're going to go for question number 1 first. And you're going to read the case information that is going to take you around 7 to 10 minutes, maybe more. Then you attempt question number 1. And I've seen and observed students that they usually take 40 minutes, 10 minutes of reading and 40 minutes answering question number 1. So if you take 40 minutes on question number 1, you've taken 10 minutes from question number 2. So you're now left with lesser time. You're now left with maybe 15 or 20 minutes to do question number 2. So you can vary the content as per your need for this particular 20-mark question. Let me know in the comments if this video was useful, and if you need guidance with respect to any other material as well, do not forget to mention your comment, because it would give me reassurances and can help me sequence and design my videos in the most appropriate manner, so that at the very end of the day, you people can benefit the most. This is Bilal Kurd. Thank you so much.